and at the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association, as well as Dr. Marc Driscoll, lecturer for food animal medicine in the School of Veterinary Medicine at UWI. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to The Know.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
A necessary conversation because in this dry season, we have to make sure that we are not just protecting ourselves in the heat and the droughts that may come, but our animals as well. So to give us a little bit of an overview, what sort of preparation should we have done already as we're in the season, Dr. Crooks, sorry? Should we have been looking at heading into the dry season? Before we get there, what should we have done to prepare?
Good question. All right. So for every year going forward, basically, we should expect that there may be drought periods, extended periods where we have little to no precipitation or rainfall. Accordingly, our recommendation is to crop and livestock producers that they find ways of storing water. That thankfully now is allowed. It's permitted for farming purposes because in Trinidad and Tobago, all water belongs to WASA ultimately. But for the time being, farmers are allowed to collect water in ponds and so on, in tanks. And we recommend that farmers store water for the dry season well in advance. However, what we've seen over the years is one, that livestock producers in particular generally fail to prepare in that regard. But also we have a significant shortage of forage available for ruminants. Farmers in Tobago, at least, where we have a lot of sheep and goats, farmers tend to find forage wherever they can, which may be alongside watercourses, rivers, and the like. And the truth is that we need to take much bolder steps towards food preservation for the dry season. So in the time of plenty, in the rainy season, when we have all the forage growing everywhere and there's grass that's 6 foot tall and no one knows what to do with it, in many cases that grass is very nutritious, we have to find ways to preserve that grass so that we have feed available in the dry season.
And that sounds easier said than done because when we talk about storage or keeping particularly the grasses for the animals, that might be a challenge. Have we seen, particularly in Tobago, Dr. Crooks, where the farmers are actually needing assistance in that regard?
Absolutely. In fact, the small ruminant project, which we would have discussed on a prior interview, maybe last year, I believe, late last year, alongside the intent to increase the small ruminant breeding stock on the island, we want to hit 1,500 breeding animals between sheep and goats in the government facilities alone. We know that we need to establish forage banks and so on, fodder banks, where we have forage, good, nutritious forage available to feed those government animals, but also be made available to the farmers. Because we recognize that the dry season, many farmers sell out all of their animals or sell out the majority of their animals because they simply cannot afford to try to feed these animals throughout the dry season. So it has been a struggle over the years, and absolutely it's one that we'll continue to face without adequate preparation. Silaging and hay production, for example, we're teaching farmers now in Tobago as part of that project, but it hasn't been widely adopted at all, not yet.
Dr. Driscoll, perhaps you can add to the reasons behind that lack of support or adoption, if you will, from the farmers. Have you been able to perhaps develop some sort of approach to thwart that challenge in your lecturing or teachings thus far?
All right, so simple answer is not easily. One of the things that our farmers tend to rely on is the fact that we have a lot of access to forage throughout the year, for the most part. But the dry season, of course, we see a reduction in the quality of this forage. Right. So as Dr. Crooks said, you really want to prepare when you're in the times of plenty. And in addition to that, we need to move away from forage just being whatever's the green stuff growing on the side of the road, as I tend to say, and begin to actually cultivate nutritious grasses. So choosing our grass species, grasses like elephant grass, tanner grass, African star, mulatto grass, even things like moringa. These are nutritious forages that you can use. You can have them planted in various areas, however you control your land, in order to now have good quality forage that you can turn into good quality hay or silage. But one of the main challenges, of course, is that not all of our farmers control the land that they graze on. And this goes into a whole other area about land ownership and land taxes and so on, which is perhaps beyond my purview. But I would strongly encourage the various support systems, be it the ministry, be it private sector, if possible, to create some of these forage banks that can then be used in a sustainable way to support our livestock industry.
And that is a fair conversation, perhaps that we can explore further. But for now, let's talk about what we can do then in terms of the season already being here and how we should approach things, knowing now that we will prepare for the future seasons. Any straightforward tips or to-dos that we can get right off the bat? Perhaps we can start with you again, Dr. Driscoll. Sorry.
Mark is fine, but yeah. Again, providing good access to cool, clean water. Again, that's a little easier now than it used to be, so that's fine. Providing shade where possible. If your animals are grazing out in pasture, have a shade tree or have a shed built well enough to provide shade for the number of animals you have. And the simplest way to determine that is you sit in the shed. If you're comfortable, the animals should be comfortable. If you're hot, the animals are going to be hot. That's the way I put it. And the important thing is to definitely observe your animals very closely as best as you can on a daily basis, because you may have animals that have decent nutrition, decent health, in a decent environment, and they're going to do okay. But any one of those parameters drops, and you may end up in a cascade of problems, right? Because it's always this narrow balance between health and nutrition for the sake of production animals. And if your nutrition begins to drop, which naturally happens during the dry season anyway, you may now have certain health issues popping up. So we just need to continue to be very alert with the health of our animals. And the farmers know their animals much better than the vets do, but that vigilance is important for when they see something happening early to call us in early. And then we could hopefully have a conversation that doesn't rely on significant amounts of treatment, more management of the situation to keep them in a healthy state until the rains return and we can now have better nutrition on the ground.
Right, prevention better than cure, as they say. Dr.
Always.
Crooks, in terms of the crops, though, any specific tips we can look forward to there where the, care is concerned?
All right. Well, I just want to follow up on what Mark said as well. So ultimately, animals may experience stress. Any changes in the environment, any changes in ambient temperature, and so on. And what Mark is alluding to, and I've told farmers this all the time, farmers know their animals best. They know their normal behaviors. They know how the animals normally eat when they go back to the pen. Whatever is the routine, they know that these animals follow along. There is no injection that can fix poor management. None. And I've encountered, unfortunately, many farmers whose animals are starving or whose animals are not given adequate water, whose animals are not being observed at time of labor, where they expect the vet to be able to come in and just give a shot to fix it. And I repeatedly emphasize to farmers that in food production, you never want to rely on a vet. Never, ever, ever. That's simply not sustainable from a business standpoint. So what you must do is find those practices and routines that can help you and help your animals and keep them in the best state of health without the vet. And in fact, reducing stress, keeping the animals in a cool, comfortable environment is one of the major factors. Still here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have animals that are tied out in whatever elements there may be, sometimes for the entire day, if not for 24 hours or longer. Maybe we have cattle for sure that are out in the field for days at a time. And if there's shelter for them, if there's shade for them, good. If not, They just exist. And the truth is that where you might have an animal that would have been 1,000 kilograms, even though the animal is surviving and to the farmer looks healthy and overall to be in a good state of health, the truth is that that animal would not achieve its genetic potential. So it could have been 1,000 kilograms, but it's actually only about 600 kilograms. And the farmers are satisfied with that, but you're actually losing production that is in a way that you can't notice. So I really want to stress how important it is to ensure that these animals are comfortable, that they have water to drink all the time, and as far as possible, you provide them with nutritious food that isn't in excess if you're feeding grain, which is something that maybe Dr. Driscoll can talk more about.
In a nutshell, these animals are built to feed on grass, right? Grain is supposed to just be a supplement, just to add to it to boost milk production or to boost meat production in certain scenarios. What we have to stress is if you do not have enough grass, please do not just feed extra grain, because that can create another problem, which in a nutshell is an acid indigestion that is frequently fatal. And you don't want to just dump an extra amount of grain on them. If you do need to increase grain for some reason, it must be very gradual over a 2 to 3 week period from where they're eating now to where they're going up afterwards. If you may tend to do this in your pregnant sheep, for example, about the 3rd month of pregnancy going into the 5th month, but it must be very, very gradual changes. So again, liaise with whichever veterinarians you have access to assist with that management of the feeding. But it still boils down to, as Dr. Crooks and I were stressing, managing the nutrition of your animals, managing the environment of your animals to keep them as healthy as possible.
Well, you both have equipped us with some magnificent information that I'm sure farmers in both Trinidad and Tobago will be putting into good use, as we underscored management being at the core of effective, management of your farms, but the premier way to make sure that you take care of your herbivores during the dry season. For more information, I'm sure that there are sites and spaces that they can head to in addition to contacting you both. So could you just share with us as we wrap contacts for both you, Dr. Driscoll, and Dr. Crooks, to remind the persons viewing?
All right, so I, as I said, hail from the School of Veterinary Medicine. So our contact number for the Large Animal Clinic is 756-9427. We do have an Instagram page, UESTA Food. I can get that onto you to display if you need to. But that's the best way to contact our school, and any of the vets that are on duty will be able to answer questions and have a conversation about management and health of your animals.
Beautiful. Dr. Crooks, remind the people how to connect with you.
So, well, one, for food-producing animals on the island of Tobago, you can call the Vet Diagnostic Lab at 660-2008, where all of our state veterinarians are based, and they can come out to you at relatively cost-effective prices. And then if you want to address the private aspect of it, the Tobago Animal Hospital can be reached at 239-7837.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning and enlightening us. I wish you a good dry season.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
An absolute delight. Of course, Dr. Paul Crooks, the media liaison and Trinidad Veterinary Association familiarity person with us here. That's the new title for you, Mr. Crooks. And of course, Dr. Marc Driscoll also giving us some insight as to how to care for your herbivores during the dry season. Great insight that continues here on The Now, when